Hello and welcome. Welcome to this 10K subscriber live stream. I cannot believe we are here. It is pretty amazing. So I'm going to take questions in general. I've got a couple of questions on the post. I will take questions from the chat. I see we've got one already. I'll answer that shortly. And then I will also do some questions from an in private Google window if I run out of things to answer in the next half an hour to 40 minutes. Okay, so yeah, welcome very much, everyone. I hope that the sound is okay and the video is okay and all the rest of that. Um, and yeah, so to answer Suvalinia's question, do I read books written in Finnish? I do not because I don't speak Finnish. Jag pratar svenska. I am what is called a Swedish-speaking Finn. So a Finno-Swede. So I don't actually speak Finnish except I can swear in Finnish. I can say please and thank you, and I can ask for basic directions. So I can kind of help myself, but if I'm like reading an official government document or I'm interacting with somebody on like an official basis, then I interact in Swedish or English. In the one says got recommended and unrecommended fellow world building YouTubers. So I'm not gonna have an unrecommended list. I think that would be pretty mean. Um, I I like a lot of esotericness in the world builder. So I like some videos from almost everyone, that's in the YouTubing world building world. Um, there's my little thought tree is a favorite of mine. It's not per se a world builder, but it's a psychologist who analyzes book and show characters from a psychological point of view, like as a psychologist, and kind of analyzes their arc and their character growth and things like that, which is really fascinating to watch from a character design perspective. If you're in the mood for like a negative take on books, James Tulos, Tulos, I think that's how you pronounce it. He's got some really long video essays about bad books, where he goes into what makes them bad and so on. He did a fantastic takedown of the fifth sorceress, which will, I think, forever be my basement dwelling book of really, really bad fantasy books. Um, then of course, I mean, there's the big ones, the big world building channels. Um, you know, Tim's world building, Hello Future Me, and so on. Um, and then I also really like following historical channels. So there's a channel called Empire Builders who really delve into like the historical rise and fall of empires. And I find that kind of like historical view of our world really inspires me in terms of creating our culture, in terms of creating fantasy cultures and so on. There's also a fun magic channel called The Magic Engineer that I quite enjoy. Um, so yeah, so I hope that's a few new channels for some of you. Other than that, yeah, I mean, my list of public subscribers, the people I publicly subscribe to is also uh, got a lot of kind of the world builders and people that I like to follow. Oh, and then for Tolkien content, I highly recommend Nerd of the Rings. Fantastic channel. Really, really, really goes into such depth and is so good. Thank you, Urbis. Yeah, it's been quite a journey. One of the comments that I got on the post that I put up um, asking for questions is was tell us about your cats. So I'm going to very briefly tell you guys about my cats. So I have 4 cats. I have 2 Bengals, the girl cat who is often here behind me on videos, and the cat whose voice you always hear that shouts, the other Bengal cat. His name is D'Artagnan, Darty. And then I have a Maine Coon, a very, very shy ginger cat, very large, shy ginger cat. And then we have my partner's cat, who that cat is a one man cat, and he loves my husband very, very, very dearly. So he will basically just hug my husband and tolerate me touching him occasionally. Um, then thank you, Everard, for your congratulations and your support. What is my all-time favorite book? So this is a difficult question because I have different genres of favorites. But if you pinned me down and said absolutely which book are you taking to a desert island to be all alone for, like, I don't know, a year or something, what are you prepared to read over and over? The answer is probably Cashil's Dart from Jacqueline Carey. Um, it remains one of my favorite of all time, eternally. And it just, yeah, I mean, she is my favorite author for a reason. And then, I mean, but I do also like certain other genre books, right? Books in different genres. Like, I really enjoy John Gwain's the first book of the Forsaken, Fury of the Gods, Forsaken of the Gods, something of the Gods. The books are all like Forsaken or Fury or etc. of the Gods. So that Bloodsworn trilogy of his. The first book was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Um, and then I liked Mistborn from Sanderson. Um, I'm not crazy about everything Sanderson put out, but Mistborn was good. I really enjoyed the Malazan first book. First book and the third book. The second book wasn't really my cup of tea. So yeah, I've got a variety of tastes. Will Farr asks, "Have you seen the movie Bullet Train with Brad Pitt?" I have not. Is it a recent movie, Will, or is it a old movie? If it's recent, I'll make a plan to see it. William says, "Congrats on 10K." Thank you, William. I was curious how much backstory of a pro tag can have before. Sorry, let me just kill that banner. There we go. How much backstory of a pro tag can have in the book before it weighs them down. So here's the thing, right? You can have as much backstory as you want. The trick is to make sure you're not drowning the reader in backstory upfront, right? What you want to do is you want to dribble the backstory out throughout the entirety of your book. You want to take your backstory of your heroes and be like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to just give you a little bit here, and then we're going to do a whole lot of plotting. And then we're going to do a little bit here and do a whole lot of plotting. Exactly. You want to drip feed the backstory to the reader. You can give them backstory going all the way back to the hero's, childhood, as long as you don't info dump it on them in like the first chapter. You know what I mean? Like that's the trick. You want to kind of gradually drip feed the backstory onto the reader. Will Fart came out in 2022. Okay, I will make a note and check out Bullet Train. I do like Brad Pitt, and it sounds like my kind of action movie, which I do enjoy. So yeah, absolutely. Um, I had another question here on the post from Celestial 1000 who asked, um, what uh, what is my favorite non-fiction books? So I actually, again, have a few favorite non-fiction books because I have a variety of tastes. Like my favorite non-fiction book in my professional life, which is software development, is Clean Coding by Uncle Bob, Bob Martin. Um, and in history, in kind of cultural anthropology, I really enjoyed a book called Why the West Rules for Now, which had a very interesting model of measuring cultural success, which ties back to like calories consumed and so on by people in that culture, calories consumed per day, and measured that in terms of like stacking cultures against each other. And it also had a very interesting premise where they were like, the innovation of a culture always happens at its borders, never at its center. So, you always go to kind of the edges of the culture and get your innovation there. I thought it was a very fascinating premise, and it was a very interesting take by the author. Then in philosophy, I particularly like Camus' work, which I only read in English, unfortunately, because I don't speak French. But I do like the kind of concept of absurdism, um, and in the philosophies. I have read the Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius and so on. Um, Seneca is probably my favorite in the more stoic side of life. So yeah, I guess I got I got a lot of favorites in the different genres of nonfiction. Um, Thank you, Wolford, and welcome. And hi, Drayden Fuzz. Great to see you here. Will asks, do you have any tricks or go-to methods for conveying difficult concept or made-up things without being overbearing and redundant? So, yes, I don't know how well it works, but I'll tell you what I do. Okay. So, I do not particularly like, for instance, magic. Okay. So, magic is typically one of the harder things to convey to the reader how it works. Yeah. And I don't really like the go-to method of a lot of people, which is, let's have a classroom scene. Let's teach somebody who doesn't know magic how to use magic, and doing that, teach the reader as well. I'm not crazy about that unless the book very naturally lends itself to that kind of classroom setup. So what I like to do is I like to have a I like video. I like to have a character who is a mage, who is a wizard, or in my case, a Dusong wielder of magic, etc. And then I just have them use the magic. I literally just throw the reader into it and be like, my character is now going to experience magic. I'm going to tell you, the reader, I'm going to show you how it feels to them, how that power feels to them coming out, what they do to shape that power, is there special words they use, special equipment, gear, anything unique that they do to make the magic happen. And then I'm going to show you the effect. So when it comes to complex, difficult things like that, like fantasy elements, I like to just take the reader through it in the head of a character and have the reader experience it. And I do that in the first chapter of Sangwheel Chronicles, which is my epic fantasy book. And I have a video on this channel where I read that chapter, and you can check out what I did there, and see if if it works for you. So, well, I think it's called chapter one, the video, something like that, or I read chapter one or something. But there's a playlist called My World, and there's a reading of me. There's a video where I read and talk about what I was trying to do in that chapter. Um, which should show you that exact thing. Um, Su Suvalini says, "Earlier today, I watched a video teaching how books should have dialogue in every couple of chapters so it isn't lacking. I have never heard this advice earlier. What's a minimum amount of dialogue?" I hmm, okay. So I have a somewhat controversial opinion on this. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. So the thing is, what you want to be careful of is you don't want to be so entirely in the character's head that the reader feels as though plot isn't happening, right? Um, and I have written chapters that have got no dialogue in. I have one chapter in a book that happens entirely in the character's head while they're rowing a canoe. Okay, so they're sitting in a canoe on the Colorado River, rowing and thinking. so, so you can write chapters like that, but you need to be cognizant that it still needs to be interesting to the reader. There still needs to be conflict in the scene, right? And that's the big problem with having chapters or scenes that are entirely internal to the character. They depend very, very heavily on internal conflict, on the character struggling with a moral dilemma or something like that, right? Creating the conflict necessary to keep the scene engaging. Because even if you have no dialogue and no action in the scene, you just have the internal thoughts of the character, there must still be conflict. So my take on it is, there is no real hard and fast rule of how much dialogue, but dialogue is an easy way to keep the scene moving, engaging, to introduce conflict, and to keep the reader active in the scene. So I hope that all makes sense. Um, okay. Uh, Kitumak says, "How can a world builder learn to stick to their creative decision and stop constantly changing their world?" So, okay. So here you need to there's two things you need to do. One, you need to get some trusted advisors around you, right? So I've got beta readers that I trust and a couple of people that I talk to about my world building. People that I say, "Listen, I'm having this kind of concept around my world. What do you think?" And then I bounce those ideas off them until I kind of refine my world down to the kind of steady state. But ultimately, it's your world. It's your world, right? You have total control over it. You can change it or you can keep it the same. You do not need to listen to anybody's advice. Okay. You are in total creative control. And I guess you need to kind of internalize that decision and make sure that your world is your world. You have made the decisions as to what goes into it and you are happy with it. The other thing to bear in mind is, if you are creating a world in order to publish a book in it, nothing is canon until you actually publish, right? Until you publish, anything can be changed if it needs to be changed in order to create a better story. And I think that if you're building specifically to write, not to run a game in, because to run a game in, you can change depending on kind of your player's attitude towards a change in canon and so on. So there's things you can do there. But in writing specifically, what you only want to change your world if it will make for a better story. But if changing your world will make for a better story, then 100% change your world building. Okay. Don't marry your world building at the expense of telling a great story. But don't change your world building unless it will make for a better story. I hope that makes sense. um, Meath says retroactive continuity is a concept that novice authors need to learn of. Use it spare. Yes, you are allowed to change canon. Okay, as long as you can make it marry with what you previously published, you can absolutely change your world. Souvenir says, can you give us an example of bad world building? Maybe something that you have encountered somewhere which made absolutely no sense at all. Your English is great. There's nothing wrong with your English. Um, so, so wow. There's a book called The Fifth Sorceress, which I do not recommend anybody read except as a horrifying, horrifying example of terrible writing. And nothing in that book makes sense. Not the world building, not the character, not the actions. At one point, the character in The Fifth Sorceress plays fetch with his horse, like his horse is a dog. He throws a stick for his horse, which then fetches the stick. It's so bad. It's so bad. Then my other go-to for really sometimes I so bad is good old Good Kind. Okay, so Terry Goodkind. The first book of the series is okay, and it kind of lulls you into a false sense of security that you're going to get an okay series. There's some good world building elements here. And then basically his whole magic system is Richard summons Deus Ex Machina to get out of whatever problematic situation the plot has put him in. And then in book 7, in book 7, Richard defeats the communists by building capitalist statues. I kid you not, that is literally how he overcomes the plot. That was terrible. It was terrible. So, yeah, those would be my go-to of terrible world building. And they're both traditionally published. So some freaking publisher took a look at that and went, yeah, this seems fantastic. Will says, how do you make the raising of stakes in a story feel believable and not rushed, especially if you want to try and keep the story in one book? For example, Shy Farm Boy to saving the whole planet. So, I'm not okay, so what you want to do is you basically want to, if you're going to go in one book, all right, your book's probably going to be a fairly dense book, but in your escalatory path, what you want to do is Act 1 is introduction. All right. So, however long your Act 1 is, probably about 10 chapters or so. What you want to do in your Act 1 is very slight increases. Then Act 2, you want to go up fairly steeply. And then Act 3 is basically like a vertical, right? But the trick to keeping it in one book, is not necessarily like fiddling with your Shy Farm Boy or whatever. It's reducing the number of plot lines. Okay, the reason why, for example, my stories, my books are so big, and why I have 4 books in my series, my epic fantasy series, is because I have, in the end, 5 point of view characters. I have 5 plot threads all running at the same time. I'm telling multiple subplot stories and multiple growth arcs. And so each in like a 200,000 word book, right? If you have 5 point of view characters, each character actually only gets 40,000 words worth of story. Okay. So that's, for instance, why The Hidden Blade is only 90,000 words, because it is one single point of view character, and that covers the whole book in 90,000 words. and it is because it's just a one character. So in order to keep your single farm boy goes out and saves the world, absolutely doable. Just make sure that you keep your point of view characters down to 1, maybe 2. Okay. And avoid subplots, because one plot can absolutely be done in a single book. The complication comes in if you do like the epic fantasy thing where you're like, I'm going to add this subplot and that subplot and this plot thread and this character growth arc. And then I'm going to show you this part of my world and so on. But that's, that's what epic fantasy is. um, Ketumak, yes, world building is very open ended. And yes, it is very, very, very easy to get distracted and go into the shinies. I do like to keep my worlds kind of orientated around an idea. So Sangwheel's idea is about, sacrifice for magic and two sides of magic and, how sides work together and also like things around dark sides and light sides and so on. So I try and world build just in that area for Sangwheel and leave some of the weirder stuff, the more out there creatures and so on for like my magic fall world building. Thank you, BJG videos. And yeah, thank you for the congratulations. Suvalini says, when did you discover you have this gift for writing and creating? How much do you think it's being gifted, being natural, and how much about learning the craft? So I think, to be completely honest with you, I think that my craft is learned. So I read as a child, I read so many books. I could read a fantasy book in a day, right? I could just consume books. And that into my adulthood, university, etc. And then at university, I started running role playing games. I did try and write a book, but it was absolutely terrible. It was horrifying, and nobody will ever see that books in the light of day. But um, I ran role playing games, and I ran a LARPing game for like 120 players and things like that for like 20 years. And I learned how worlds should be put together, and I learned how to put stories together, and I learned how to create conflict and how to kind of, put hooks in play that people can then work towards, and how to build worlds that remain cohesive even after player characters have touched them, because player characters have got amazing abilities to destroy worlds. So I don't think that I am particularly massively talented. I don't think, I popped out of, um, I don't think I popped into existence with like storytelling potential. I think I learned over 20 years of running role playing games, of writing, of reading. I just learned how to put worlds together, and I really do enjoy doing it. So that's how we got here. So yeah, I read a lot of nonfiction, and I've read a lot of nonfiction. I consumed a lot of history and philosophy and anthropology and all kinds of things like that. So it, that just all of that just helps to inform me about what I'm doing and so on. So yeah, to answer your question, I don't think that it's an inborn talent. I think it's just work. Um, then huh, um, yeah. So, um, Will Will Farr says, "How much thought do you put into names, whether it's character, places, magic, etc.?" I put a lot of thought into names, probably more than I should. So I'll give you an example, not from one of my current worlds, but from one of the LARPing worlds, right? So we were naming a bay. Okay, and it was on the map, it looked like this. It was kind of like the sack shape. And so I said, okay, so it looks like a sea shack. a sea sack, like it looks like a sack of sea. But the people that we had living there, we had decided should be inspired by Italians. Okay, so we would use the Italian language as like their naming model. So I was like, okay, what would a sea sack be called in Italian? And the answer was something like mare sake or something like that. I don't speak Italian, so I can't remember now exactly what it was. And then I basically amalgamated those two words, combined them, and kind of aged it over, a couple of centuries and went, okay, it is now the Bay of Moresco, the Bay of Sisak. None of our players ever knew where that came from. None of them cared. You know, but I cared. It mattered to me where that name comes from. So most of my place names, like Somfa, Lumios, etc., like there are reasons why I pronounce them the way I pronounce them. There's reasons why they are the way they are. A kind of cultural, aging and link back to like the cultures that form the base cultures that came together to form the people of the Bloedben and so on. But, yeah, I mean, most readers, don't get that level of detail. But I do it because it amuses me. So I don't necessarily do the whole naming thing for other people. I do it for me because it's funny for me, and, some of the readers do get it. Like in Magic Fall, we have this little these nanobots that fuel magic called Jiren, and the reason why they're called Jiren is because it's like aspirin. It's the name of a company that made these nanobots. And so they're called Jiren because the Jiren company made the nanobots. And yeah, so stuff like that. That's how much thought I put into it, Will. So I hope that answers your question. I don't necessarily advise doing naming the way that I do it, which is why I don't generally talk about naming, because unless you're doing it for yourself, there's no point in doing what I do, right? Find something cool and just call your city that, or your people that, like something that rolls off the tongue nicely. Because the thing is, most readers, they're never gonna know. You know, they're just never gonna know. Um, Meath says writing is a practice skill, same as all skills. Absolutely. Writing, storytelling, world building, it's all skills. Ain't nobody born a great writer. The other thing is, like my podcast partner Drake likes to say, great genius isn't written, it's edited. And he's right, you know. Your first draft, whether you're a plotter or a pantser, is probably going to be pretty icky and pretty gnarly, and you're going to need to spend some time editing it, especially at the beginning, when your first draft, when you start writing, your first draft is terrible. It's full of passive voice and it's crowded with filters and all kind, you know because you're just learning. You don't even know what those things are, and it does get better over time as you just write more and more. Um, Thank you, Tony. Yeah, I'm very proud of my uh, of my 10K, and I thank you very much, all of you guys, for being here for this journey. It has been a pretty incredible journey. I did not think I would get here when I started this back in 2021. So it's been pretty cool. And you guys have been a great part of that. So, I thought that one of the other things we could do is ask Google uh, world building questions. So, how do I world build? How do I world build? Start. um, so yeah, Google's how do I world build is how do I start world building? I like to start world building with a concept that I'm going to set in this world. Like what is this world's purpose all about? So with Sangwheel, I started out with a concept of I want this world to be about, costs and balances and where do you draw the line? Like when is something too high a cost? And so on. Tanky Tanky asks, um, how do I make cultures distinct if I have part in a little country town and the next part across the world in a royal court? What's your advice for making the differences clear? So there's a couple of things here that a couple of tricks you can use to make your cultures really feel distinct, right? One is the idioms that they use. Okay, so for example, with my characters, like Louis will not use sailing idioms, right? He uses idioms related to ice and he uses similes related to ice. So he will talk about ice and snow and all of the kinds of things that comes from the northern climate that he exists in. Yeah. But like Raoul, who comes from a southern duchy, will make sailing references and talk about sea metaphors and will relate things back to the ocean because he comes from a seagoing culture. And I did a thing with time as well for the same reason, and that I did to distinguish the two continents. So on the main continent which Sangwheel takes place in, Sangwheel Chronicles takes place in, they measure time using a candle clock, right? So it's like a candle burns down, and then so their time expressions are like there's a seconds is flickers and a little while is the candle burns down and wax droops off the candle is like time passing, stuff like that. But in the southern continent of Kisangani, they measure time with a water clock. So they will say, time flees through the spigot because time for them runs out of a tank. So having those kinds of differences in your culture, like this culture measures time like this. This culture is more into agriculture. This culture is more into weaving. And then changing their language and the expressions that they use is a nice subtle indicator to the reader, like what the differences are in culture. And then also things like art and sport and also the way people talk. Like if in your example you said like a village and a court, so the village people have them talk like peasants, little bit of bad grammar, like very casual with each other and so on. In the and they greet each other very casually and so on, and they talk about old Ma, the widow who lives down at the bottom of the lane, and young Josh runs a tavern over his back, over his kitchen and so on. Like it's a very casual, informal atmosphere. But in the royal court, in the court culture, it would be very formal and people would be introduced and they would address each other by their titles and their grammar would be perfect, and their kind of conversations would be very formal and correct. So you can also in the dialogue of people make a difference. um, Thank you. I hope that helps your address your question. Smoke Dementia, hi, asks any advice for someone who has a concept for a world but no idea what to do with it. So I would build a concept and then I would start writing and see where the writing takes you. A little like I am a firm believer in pantsing a little bit, like pants a little bit, plot a little bit, pants a little bit, plot a little bit. You know, there's nothing wrong with some exploratory writing in your world to see where it takes you. And if it takes you to a good place, you can then start plotting. But sometimes it's worth just actually putting pen to paper and writing a little bit and seeing how it goes and where that kind of exploratory writing takes you. Give it a shot. Um, Civilini says, "Are there any themes or concepts you wouldn't ever touch in your writing or even in your reading?" Um, I would never take a position where I justify Um, I would never take a position where I justify child abuse, child sexual abuse. I I can't. That hits very, very close to home for me. Yeah, and I try and avoid books with that in, um, because it does trigger a little bit on my baggage. Um, but that's personal to me, right? That's a personal thing. I So my warning around themes is not like I think that you can write about any theme. You can write about racism, about sexism, about misogyny, whatever you want to write about. You can have, anything in your books, but make sure that what you're writing is on purpose and by design, right? Y don't don't have themes that on accident appear, in your books. Like, make sure that and if you have heavy themes like slavery, misogyny, colonization, um, racism, abuse, if you have such themes, address them with the gravitas they deserve, right? It's not to say that you shouldn't have those themes. Just give them the gravity that they deserve to be addressed with, if that makes sense. Like, that's all. That would be my recommendation there. Um, Will says, "Do you have any personal rules for killing off characters?" I absolutely do. So, I have no objection to killing off characters. But if I am killing off a character, I have a couple of rules. One, I better be very, very, very sure that I'm not going to need that character again. Because I do not if I have shown you the body. Now, if I haven't shown you the body, it's like habeas corpus. No body, no death. Okay. Or not necessarily a death. But if I have shown you the body, it's done. Okay. That character better never be needed again because I ain't bringing it back. So that's the first thing. I must be very sure I'm not going to need the character again. But the second thing for me is a character death is a serious thing. Okay. I'm going to take, hopefully, hopefully, I'm going to take the reader and put them into the pain of that character dying. I'm assuming we were talking about a good guy character dying, not the bad guy character dying. And if I'm going to do that to the reader, I want the death to have gravity and impact on the reader. Like, I want the reader to feel like the death had meaning, right? Because I don't do the grim dark thing of life is terrible in this fantasy world and people can die falling down the stairs. Yes, of course, our world is like that. But we don't read to be in our world. We read to be in fantasy world. So, I mean, there's, you know, history is full of like terrible near misses and people dying from dysentery and things like that. And if we wanted to read that kind of world, we could, just read our world. So I personally like to make sure that if I'm killing a character, I'm doing it with gravity and with grief, and I'm making that character's death have impact on the story, on the reader, on the other characters. It is an event with gravitas. That's my personal rule about killing characters. Um, then I did not use resurrection. You take that back. Raoul was not dead. Habeas corpus. um, Garrett says, as an amateur writer with a lack of skills along with that, what should I initially dedicate my focus on in world building? I would focus on building a cohesive culture, building a magic system, right? Some kind of magic or some kind of fantastical element, and then creating a culture that works, a cohesive culture that works, because that is probably the hardest thing to master, is creating a culture that cohesively works in a fantasy world. And that's why I've spent so much time in the world building podcast on it, the world building blueprints. Is because it is so important, and it is the one that is got the most moving parts. Um, Tony says the theme should serve the story and have a reason for being there. Absolutely. The that is indeed the rule with themes. Um, Subin Lee says, "Thank you for your wise advice. A pleasure. Have you ever made an interview with a person of experience for your fiction writing?" Have I? I'm not quite following. So I have a couple of interviews on the channel about world building from various authors. I've had Jacqueline Carey on twice, and then I have a writing podcast with my partner Maxwell Alexander Drake, called Releasing Your Inner Dragon, where we talk purely about writing. Yeah, so, and I've also talked, I've got a couple of interviews actually. There's a playlist where I have some interviews with James as well. Um, so you can check those out, and there's some world building advice there. Werber says, my approach around themes is just to do the research, imagine a different point of view. 100%. 100%. Just make sure that you pay the theme respect. Give the theme the gravity and respect it deserves. Whatever your theme is, just give it some respect. I'm sorry, I can't read your name, but I will answer your question. I have a question. What is your opinion about stories who slavery is normal in the main character are the good guys, but they're not going to stop slavery? I I don't know. So I'll tell you what my concern is with stories that have slavery as a background element. Is it's the same, like, if you're just going to have slavery as a background element, why have it? Right? What is your reason for including it in your world? You have a blank canvas of your world. You are the creator of your world. Everything in your world exists because you have put it into your world, right? Um, so even if you take our world as a base or whatever, you choose what to include from our world. So why include slavery if you're not going to do anything with it? That's kind of my question around it, right? Like, and I'm not saying don't do it, but it's kind of like 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 rape. Okay, a lot of women experience sexual violence, and why include it in your story if it's just going to be a casual background element? I mean, everybody knows that it happens in the world, right? But why put it on the page is kind of my question. So it's not like, I'm not going to say don't do it, and I've read plenty of books that have slavery as a kind of casual background element. That some cultures just have slavery. Um, but yeah, like my question is always just why? Why include it? Like what is the purpose of including such a heavy thematic topic if you're going to do nothing with it? So that would be my caution. And not to say that you can't do it. I mean, it's your world. You can do anything you like. But you know, be aware of kind of caution around it. Um, Mia's like casually kills people because necromancy, 100%. um, what is your opinion about Jujutsu Kaisen and Demon Slayer world building and magic system? So I don't know that I've necessarily seen all of those. Kaisen's kind of monster based, right? Is this an anime magic system? I think I'd have to watch the anime in question to give a. Uh, um, Thank you, Katie, and welcome. Suvinli says, "Oh, it's my English again. I'm from Finland." I figured. So I meant to ask, have you done an interview with someone with specific experience so you can have more? Yes, so I have had a number of interviews with people. If you're talking about like my specific so I've interviewed a doctor and I've interviewed some artists and things like that, which you can also find on my interview table, which I've interviewed for the channel. Me personally, to talk to people about world building elements, yes, I absolutely have. I've spoken to multiple kind of experts in medical fields specifically, because medical fields was my weakest world building point. I don't really have a very comprehensive grasp on medicine and chemistry and so on. So when I was like putting together my world and figuring out chemistry, I did a lot of interviews around that. And then when I did Magic Fall, specifically, I actually bought a subscription to the Brilliant app and did Sabine Hossenfelder's quantum. I did her quantum course on there, like her introductory quantum course, so that I could use that quantum science knowledge to world build Magic Fall, because Magic Fall is entirely based around like quantum mechanics and stuff like that, which is was quite a lot of research. Um, so you have a question about morality and stories. We have a main character who's 100% a good guy, but he buy and sells slavery and other subjects. He's perfect. Do you see problems or not? Um, so I would question that. I would question that morality. Right now, morality is a subjective thing, but I don't like the concept of people owning other people. Okay, I don't think that you should remove, I personally, in my life, in this current life that I live now, I don't believe that you have the right to bodily own somebody else and remove their autonomy of their body. Okay. And I would have difficulty in seeing perfectly justified morality in a heroic character who, buys and sells people's, based on their bodily autonomy. Now, there are, of course, I mean, smoke dementia brought up indentured servitude and so on. I mean, you can look at debt as a form of, that kind of, where you're forced to work in order to pay off a debt, and you can look at that as a form of slavery and, buying and selling of those contracts. Now, I would have problems with that. As I sit here today, I would have problems with that. But I could, I guess, get behind that in a book. But a chattel slave, like somebody who says that you're born a slave and you will eternally be a slave because you're born a slave, and the hero is not just okay with that, but supporting it by buying and selling people like that, I would have issues with that hero. Like for me, that would not be a heroic or moral character. But that would be for me. Like, their different audiences have different tastes on it, have different opinions on it. Um, but I would struggle to see that as a moral character, personally. um, um, yeah, I mean, so, you know, on the one hand, so So I don't believe that, I don't believe that there's a goal to the universe or anything like that. So I believe that we create morality, um, and so on. So, you know, but I would find it very hard to get behind a slaver. um, Absolutely, Citron says, how does one write religious fantasy characters where there are no gods or god in a fantasy world, like caveman animism? So, animism is actually a great example. And I would look towards a lot of the kind of Japanese fictions. We've got some great animistic religions in there, where people have like shrines and torii arches and rituals that they engage in. I would also look towards kind of broader religions than just the main kind of European, Middle Eastern, Northern Africa kind of religions. You've got a lot of options in terms of like religious practices. Um, I think that you could also just straight up go with spirit worship or with, um, you know, people can be like in Pern, in Anne McCaffrey's Pern books. She never mentions religion, literally, never. Like they're all just universally, I guess, atheist. So you've actually got a lot more options in religion than having like a big kind of church set up or whatever. You've got like good options. I would look towards the Japanese fiction models for like animism depiction and things like that. And then yeah, like look into Africa's the sub-Saharan part of Africa's got some interesting non-deific religions. I think is a good name for them. Buddhism be a pretty good like example of that as well. Um, Do you have a habit of writing way too much purple prose? Did you ever have? What are your biggest challenges when writing the first draft? So I don't really write purple prose all that much. I do like my biggest challenge with the first draft is I tend to write a little bit bare. So I can sometimes my second and third drafts, my edits, is normally to add more descriptions and similes and placements and to kind of like because I tend to write very minimalistic, very small. So then I have to kind of flesh it out and make it bigger and add more description and more, especially sensory. So smell, taste, feeling, texture, tactile, hearing, etc. That's generally my weak point. Alex says, what advice do you think is important to those that want to add other fictional intelligent races aside from humans into their world? So my biggest question with non-human races is always, what purpose do they serve? Okay, like if it's just to be a cool factor, 100% make them as cool as you possibly can. Give them electric organs to like spark their hair blue or whatever, like go nuts. But I would generally, um, I would generally say that consider what purpose you are creating these species for. Like, is it to demonstrate, is it to play off against like people who look different? Is it to have literal different species and to see what that kind of competition would do? If like these two species that cannot interbreed meet each other, like can they share a world? Things like that. So yeah, it just think about the purpose that you want the different species to serve and yeah, build away, like absolutely. um Drudenfus says, I usually get into hot water because I find xenophobia even against supposedly evil people like orcs wrong. So I mean, I I I understand where you're coming from, and I agree with you, but in some cases, like you want to start out from that position so that you can show a change, like a character growth of learning that perhaps xenophobia is wrong, etc. Yeah, but yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Um, Mia says, I don't think I've ever seen a fantasy story that didn't feature gods, but I'm not as widely read as I could and indeed should be. So the Pern books really don't have any gods. Not one. Not a single god. Um, Catherine Kerr's gods aren't real gods. They're just like powers dotted around the kind of planar landscape. Um, I don't think George R. R. Martin's gods are real. I think they're all fake. So yeah, it depends. um, Smoke Dementia says separating the author's real life morality from what is treated as moral in the story. Okay, so I actually do have an opinion on this one. Like my main character is an assassin. He kills people, like in Sangwell, he kills people. I obviously do not stand behind this as a moral choice. I will never be, for murder. I don't think one should be for murder. But I chose the character specifically because I wanted the story to be about where do you draw the line, right? If you say that there are 100 people, I can save 49 of them, or I can save 51 of them by killing 49. Is this an acceptable trade-off to make? And the only way I could tell that story, or the only way that I felt that I could tell that story effectively, is by having an assassin as the main character, because he doesn't place the same value on human life as I do. I've never taken a life, right? So for me, the thought of taking anyone else's life it's an insurmountable obstacle, right? If I was to stand in front of somebody with a gun in my hand, I don't know if I could pull the trigger because I've never been in that position, right? I don't know if I personally, as I sit here, could do it, but I can live myself into the character of somebody who's very callous towards this. And that enabled me to tell this kind of like ends justify the means thematic element, and consider whether, where is the line, and where is an acceptable line. And so that is how I split my personal morality from that of my character. Um, Werber says ancestor worship is pretty universal. Yep, there's a lot of ancestry worship fantasy as well. Will says, do you think epigraphs are a valid form of conveying lore and information to the reader? Are there limits on how vague an epigraph needs to be to hook the reader and give information? So, um, hmm. So epigraphs can work really well if the character obviously goes and reads the epigraph. So for those who don't know, an epigraph is an inscription on building stone or coin, or a short quotation or saying at the beginning of a book or chapter intended to suggest its theme. Okay, so there's two meanings to it. So I use epigraph in Sangwell Chronicles. Okay. I have like and that, like, some of them are like a sentence long, and one of them is a full-blown sonnet. Like, I actually spent hours writing a sonnet because I felt that it was appropriate. Um, and it's Shakespearean and everything. It's got the right um, rhyming scheme and everything. And I feel that epigraphs are very valuable if used correctly. But you don't want to basically give the whole plot away, and you don't want to write pages of it. Okay, so short, like a couple of paragraphs at most, preferably one paragraph, like 5 or 6 lines, and convey what you want to convey and move right along with the actual meat of the chapter, would be my advice. For a great example from a traditionally published author in Mistborn, Brandon Sanderson actually tells two stories in the Final Empire. The epigraphs tell the Lord Ruler story, and the main story is the chapter story. So you can read the epigraphs and get one story, one complete story, and read the chapters and get another. It's a great use of epigraphs. So yeah, I'm a fan of epigraphs in general. Um, Nima says, thank you for a nuance of difficult themes. Yeah. Certain topics, look, here is the raw truth. Okay. Every reader is going to come into your books with their own baggage. All right. And they're going to read your baggage, and it's going to be, um, it's going to be like their baggage might really react badly with your themes. And if it's one or two readers who react like that, you can't predict everybody's baggage, right? It's impossible. But if 30% or 40% of readers react poorly to your themes, right? Then you've probably mishandled the theme for the majority of people's baggage. And you should maybe take another look at it. I'm not saying change it, but maybe take another look at it. Consider whether what you're saying is really what you want to say is what you're actually saying on the page. So it's just worth looking at it. I have a question. What is your opinion about magic systems that they have every user have different abilities and mostly they use it in compact? Do you think this harms the story? So it depends. So this is a great candidate. That kind of magic system is a great candidate for a soft magic system, right? You don't want to go hard magic on that one because it's going to be really difficult to explain to the reader all the rules. But if you keep it reasonably soft and you treat it kind of like the X-Men powers, right? So each individual character has their own rules for their magic system. They use their magic kind of individually. It all comes from the central wellspring and they all use their magic. You're good to go. I mean, X-Men does that, right? Every character has their own individual power that kind of comes from their abilities. So yeah, you can absolutely do it. You just need to kind of be cognizant of keeping the magic a little softer in terms of like core rules and only focusing on each individual magic users and their weaknesses and their abilities. Eh, um, could I do another vampire? I don't know the Tsukume vampire. Could I do another vampire video? Yes, I could. I could. Um, I will schedule another vampire video. What you actually need to do is give me a whole list of anime recommendations so I can add it to my to-view list. Mia says, I've never read Pern because I have issues with how dragon and dragon knight relations works, and I've never read Martin because I don't hate women that much. Fair enough. Werbus, I think gods in fantasy is more like artifact of Greek myth-centric thinking. Yeah. Yep. I No, no, Drudenfuss, I am not in fact an assassin. Does this look like an assassin's face? Um, do you ever have trouble sleeping because you're so inspired about your writing and all the missing puzzle pieces are just floating? For me, it's been about 10 months straight already. So, yes, sometimes I do. Sometimes I am so super excited about a book or an idea or a concept or a chapter that I can't sleep until I get it out, until I get at least the basics onto the page. Um, so it's a good thing, not a bad thing. Um, and yeah, I think you absolutely should, embrace that and go forth with it. Um, This might not be the channel, but do you have any tips on incorporating magic into romance scenes? Light romance, not risque. So I actually did incorporate magic into my risque, into my erotica, which you can find under the name of Talia Tethers on Smashwords, um, where I used it kind of centrally in my in my I tied sex into my magic, and I am 100% okay with the decisions that I made in that book. Um, so I would say that if you want to include magic in romance scenes, you probably want to look at kind of like how would people use magic to court each other, right? So if a mage is courting another mage, do they bring the magic as a gift? Do they do magic to show off? Is it like young men flexing their muscles? What is that kind of approach? So, um, yeah. Um, I could maybe do a video about that topic at some point. Um, Thank you for discussing heavy topics. It feels very different to read about something like child essay, having experienced it. Yes. Yeah. I I had an unpleasant childhood experience along those lines, and it does hit. If that has been your life experience, that kind of a thing, hits very differently. And it is, especially if there's, like, a hint of approval around it. Like, "Oh, yes, but, he's actually a good person." No, 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 he's not. No. Or, "Oh, but, you must excuse him because he or she," to be fair, it could be he or she, "had a bad childhood." No, no, I really don't have to. So, yeah. Um, uh, Alicia says, "Do you have any advice for approaching classic fantasy races from fresh, unconventional angles?" So, yeah, um I would personally, like with elves, for example, I would think about things like if you have, I don't know, 1,000 years to scheme, to plot and to scheme, what are the depths and the subtleties of the politics you could produce? Like, to my mind, elves would be kind of like World of Darkness vampire level politics. I would see them like scheming with like these plots that unfold over centuries and people getting snared on them, and the elves basically like just screw people over. So that would be my approach to elves. With like um orcs, I would build a warrior culture out of orcs. Like I would build, one of those like bro cultures, like gym bro cultures with maybe a little bit of like more violence than a typical gym bro culture. But that would be the kind of culture that I'd build there. And I would kind of use those fantasy tropes that often go with them, but then changed like with dwarves. Like dwarves would make amazing bankers and investors and things like that. What if the dwarves were actually like the innovators and drivers of the economy? Not like treasure hoarders, but like literal, they're not miners. They like take other people's wealth and put it to work and, drive the innovation and stuff like that. So I think that would be very, very interesting. So that'd be kind of the spins that I would put on it. Um, Alex says the species serves to explore things like how they see each other, racist and racist bias. Absolutely. Then I think you have great reasons to include different species. If you want, like it is a very like using fantasy species as a means to explore heavy topics from our world without the baggage from our world is a very valid way to use them to explore xenophobia and racism and so on, and kind of the cultural harms that come from that kind of othering of people and so on. Great way to use it. uh, Hard magic system, everybody has a unique ability. Yeah, like X-Men. So, then which Harry Potter characters are your top 3 faves? Oh, Hermione's probably my favorite Harry Potter character. I have a real soft spot for Luna Lovegood. And I'm also really, really attached to the werewolf. Uh Professor the werewolf character who was their teacher, Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher in the 3rd year. Like, that would be my, um uh Do I prefer hard magic systems or soft ones? So I like magic systems that work for the story. I honestly like people say I prefer hard magic systems, and it's not true, right? Jacqueline Carey's magic system is soft as a marshmallow. I even asked her when I had her on for an interview, I was like, "Did you have any rules in this magic system?" She was like, "Not a one. I made it all up as I went along." You know? It's like, oh, I could never do a magic system like that. Like I could never create a magic system like that. But I love her books, and I love the book. Even though the magic system is that soft, I love it. And I also love Brandon Sanderson's magic systems. And I also like I don't per se have a, this hard is better than soft or soft is better than hard. The magic system must work for the story. That's the most important part. If your magic system works for your story, you're golden. Like that's all it needs to do, right? It doesn't like it's you can change the rules even of a hard magic system. You can have a soft magic system that the rules never change, if you even have rules. Like it's just a case of making sure that your magic system works for your world and your story. That's my opinion on hard versus soft. I personally build hard magic systems, but I don't make them as hard as Brandon Sanderson's, for example, because I don't expose that level of rules to my readers, right? But I find it easier to write a story when I have certain rules about my magic system. So, because it kind of contains and limits what I put in the story so that I don't fall into Deus Ex Machina traps and things like that. So I personally build harder magic systems with more rules, but in terms of a reader, like I will read whatever as long as it works for the story. I enjoyed Berserk. I enjoyed Berserk. To what extent do you think characters' weaknesses can make them seem more heroic, and what, if any, limits would you place on that strategy? So, I think that characters should have weaknesses that they overcome during the story. I think that that is kind of the growth arc. I'm not a huge fan of the fatal flaws, that cause a character to inevitably fail or this or that or the other thing. That's because I don't like the Greek heroic myths much. So, um, so yeah, but I do think that characters should have weaknesses, and I think that they should grow to overcome those weaknesses in the course of the book. Like if your point of view characters don't grow, like what is the point of the story? You know what I mean? We want the characters to grow. We want them to emotionally and to grow as people and to go from the wrong side of the theme to the right side of the theme and to kind of learn as they go through the story. Um, how do you write a character that you truly disagree with politically, religiously? Do you have any advice? Yes. Live yourself into the mindset of that character when you're writing that character. So I'm not religious. Okay. But I write religious characters sometimes. And it's a hard mindset for me to get into because it's not something that I do. But when I write those characters, I try very hard to live myself into the mindset of somebody who is faithful, who believes in a God, who is devoted to a God, and not like cynically devoted, not like pretending for politics, like genuinely believes, has genuine faith, right? And the reason why is because when I'm writing a character like that, it is incumbent upon me as the author to depict that character faithfully and truly and not make it a caricature, right? And you want to avoid being a caricature of a character. So try and live yourself truly into that mindset of that character and write from that perspective. Um, Kind of like a method actor. Try the kind of method actor techniques. Um, Will says, any advice on transitioning from brainstorming and outlining into actual writing? Right. Seriously, well, you've got to write. Join a writers group or join critique circle or something like that. Commit yourself to writing. You can join my Discord server. We have writing sprints on Mondays and on Wednesdays, where we write for like an hour. Me and a couple of others in the Discord server, and you put on how many words you've written in that sprint. You put it into the Discord server. you There is only one way to write, and that is to actually make yourself write. You have to actually put words on the paper. No other way. I can't offer any more advice than that. Right. um Thank you says, speaking of elves and how they are presented, isn't it funny that Elrond is essentially the gold standard for high elvish characters, despite the fact that he's yes. Yes, it is funny that Elrond is the standard for high elvish characters, but he's not, in fact, a full elf. Um, Hard magic systems feel somewhat gamified. They can feel gamified, but they don't have to, right? You can have a hard magic system that isn't gamified. You just need to make sure that you spend enough time to invest into the wonder of the magic system. It's the author just needs to like invest in making it feel wondrous. Um, you can change a magic system in the middle of the story, but then you need to make sure that there's a logical reason for it. Like the reader's been through the book expecting one thing. Now it's changing. So you need to guide the reader through the process of change. You need to help the reader understand how the change came about so that they can then get onto it. Power scaling, it depends. So the thing is, power scaling is okay as long as you don't get like the massive power crawl where it's just like, you know, we start out fighting against house cats and we end up battling dragons, and sometimes that can feel a little unrealistic. Um, How do I balance limitations and rule of cool in the magic system? So I actually have a plan to bring out a video at some point about rule of cool and where you draw the line with it. I do think that the one thing you need to be cognizant of, whatever rule of cool thing you're introducing, that you're putting pen to paper and you're writing, you are going to have to live with that in the future. Okay. So if the characters face a similar kind of situation and the rule of cool effect would come into play in the future and it would sink your plot, that rule of cool feature has now been introduced and you can't take it back. So, and that's always my limiting factor that I think about is, what effect will this rule of cool have on the future, and can I live with it? If I can live with introducing it, I will do that. I will introduce the rule of cool. I will do the thing, because if it's cool enough, it's cool enough, right? But you need to understand what the future impact is, and you need to be at peace with the changes it will bring. Have you ever put something between the lines or hidden some secret in your writing that nobody discovered, even though the little clues were there? Yes. Yes, absolutely. Nobody in my beta reading group picked up on like a revelation of one of the secondary characters in Sangwell Chronicles. And that kind of just is what it is now. Because I can't go back and change the previous books. So, um, if we created a magic system and world building only for fights to make the fights better and explain them, other things do not. I mean, you can. I mean, there's plenty of magic systems that are just about combat. So, you know, nothing wrong with it. What trope do you hate the most? Female characters who have abuse in their past in order to make them a strong character. I freaking hate that one. There are plenty of other ways to create strong women characters. You do not need to have them come from an abused background. Um, I, and most tropes can work, in my opinion. I don't per se have a massive hate for most tropes, but you know, but it depends on how it's implemented. Almost anything can work if it's implemented well. Um, most difficult part is an interesting plot. So, yes. I think the big thing with plot is to focus on the conflict. What is the core conflict of the plot going to be? You know, what is your villain? What is your villain trying to achieve? And then how are your protagonists going to stop him is one way to approach it. Or what is going to happen in your world? What is creating the conflict? You know, is a meteor coming and the characters have to try and stop the meteor, etc. Like what is the thing that is happening that is kind of that the characters have to act against is a good place to start. Shape shifting magic. Take the reader into the shapeshifter. I actually have a whole video on shapeshifters on the channel. You can find it. You should be able to find it in the older videos. I have a video about shapeshifters specifically, like a whole video on shapeshifting magic and shapeshifters and everything. It's quite a fun video. I enjoyed it. I did a whole bunch of research into berserking and like what people did and so on. What is the name of your Discord? Same as my channel, Just in Time Worlds. There is a link to the Discord server in most of the new videos. Um, yeah, check out the video on the channel, the shapeshifter video on the channel. The worst plot twist you've ever read about in a published book. So the thing with plot twists are the best plot twists are plot twists where the reader can look back and say, "Oh, those were the signs I should have picked up on." You know, where you can see the signs when you're looking back. Not necessarily when you're reading them and looking forward, but when you're at the end and you're looking back, you can say, "Huh, so that was what that meant." That's ideally what you want from a plot twist. Sanderson's plot twists are pretty good. He does a good line in plot twists. Movie-wise, for me, the best plot twist will eternally be The Sixth Sense. Like, that's probably my go-to for plot twists, and if you know, you know. Like, um um, what are your thoughts on a mix of soft and hard world building? Uh Okay, so let's start with soft and hard world building. So I think that you should absolutely do soft and hard world building. I think that you should build hard world building where you need it, where it's important, where characters are going to interact with it, and you should have soft world building elsewhere because you need to be able to change it more easily. You don't want to set things in stone before you've actually written about it because you don't know how things might need to change. So softer. Um, my thoughts on having a lore YouTube channel dedicated to discussing lore. Your own lore, as in your world building, I don't know. I don't know if that'll work as a YouTube channel. Um, I I don't even like Sanderson doesn't have that, and he has a YouTube channel. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure that discussing your own lore would work as a YouTube channel. Other people's lore, 100%. Like there's channels dedicated to Tolkien, etc., etc. So, what are some common mistakes you see when the villain or antagonist switches throughout the story? Uh, I'm not sure I understand the question, Will. Do you mean like the antagonist becomes a good guy, like a villain to hero arc, a redemption arc? My biggest problem with redemption arcs is when they're gratuitous, when they're unnecessary, and when they are not done well. Like I don't think Darth Vader's arc was particularly well done as a redemptive arc. Um, you know, um, for example. And I love Star Wars. I absolutely adore Star Wars, and I don't think his arc was all that well done. Inner Demon Troop. Yeah, so I enjoyed Naruto. And I think, you can absolutely make good stories about inner demon tropes. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Do I know of unique military structures in history that would make a good fantasy army? Oh, I'd have to do research. Most of my military knowledge comes from the Roman armies, which I studied extensively because I based the empire, my empire's armies on them. Um, I also did a whole bunch of studying into the Hittite armies recently and the chariots and so on because I'm basing Imogen in Sangwil Tales on the Hittites, so I did a chunk of research into that recently. Um, but yeah, I'd need to do I need to do some studying for that. I think one of the most interesting military structures, like, and I'm talking now about a building structure, defensive structure. Um, Julius Caesar, in one of his campaigns, I think it was Caesar, he built he built a defensive wall, and then or the city built a wall. Then he built a wall to defend against the relieving army. So there was like two walls and this army in the middle. Caesar eventually won that campaign. But yeah, that was fascinating. Like that whole campaign of the building of the two walls. I think it was God. I am speaking under massive correction, but I think it was Elisha. I think it was the battle at Elisha. Hi Ray, good to see you. Um, Will says one antagonist switched out for another, either by defecting or realizing there is a greater threat. Yeah, so you can do that. They did that a little bit in A Song of Ice and Fire, where you have the antagonist switch out of um, the wildlings become the allies of the men of the watch, um, to Jon Snow's detriment. Um, I think it can be a great story if well executed. Um, I think you have great potential there, either in showing that people can't accept that kind of switch, or that people can accept that kind of switch, depending on how you feel about humans, really. Mm, yeah. Um, I that is very specific, Noctilon. I don't have any particular opinions on that. Sorry. Um, I think anything can work. What is your opinion on the stories when the main character goes to another world and he does not want to go back? So I think it can be great. It just depends on how you execute it. I do play Dark Souls, or I have played Dark Souls. What is the harshest critique you've got about your writing? Is it from Drake? Um, I Drake actually wasn't that harsh. I've had people critique me very harshly on Critique Circle, and say things like, "This is terrible. I would never read this. It's trash." Um, I generally ignore that kind of critique because it's not actually useful, you know. If you're just gonna trash the writing, then clearly my writing style ain't for you, and that's okay. We can amicably part ways. Um, Will says favorite horror book or movie? Black Sheep, which is a New Zealand schlock horror B movie about were sheep. It's amazing. It is hysterically funny. I love it. You know Drake. I know Maxwell Alexander Drake, who is my podcast partner, not the musical Drake. Um, okay, I have been yapping for an hour and a half. So I very much enjoyed this live stream. I hope you guys did as well. Um, and I I will see you all soon. Um, have a great weekend, and we will touch base again soon. Bye, guys, and thank you for being part of this journey.